Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate everybody joining us at 2 o'clock. We are going to give a couple of minute here to make sure we get everybody in from the waiting room and everybody's got an opportunity to join us. But it is wonderful to see so many smiling faces, and we'll get started here in just a moment. I feel like I should have prepared with some background music for everybody, some like lo-fi chill. And thank you all. I know, you don't all have to have your camera on, but I appreciate those of you that do. As TA providers, you all know it's nice to see faces when you're doing this. So thanks for doing that. For those of you who have it on the background, totally understand as well, but just wanted to make that acknowledgement. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Pelletier, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with BJA, where I provide support and assistance on matters related to BJA-funded training and technical assistance. I should mention that I was once sitting where you are. For nearly a decade, I worked as a TTA provider myself, so I completely understand the importance of clear guidance during transitions like this one. Today's session is focused on helping you navigate the transition from the legacy TTARP system to JustGrants for your performance measure reporting. Our colleagues from BJA's National Training and Technical Assistance Center, NTTAC, will be walking you through a detailed crosswalk and explaining the updates to activity types, deliverables, and performance metrics. Before I turn things over to them, I do want to emphasize a couple of critical points. Your upcoming reporting deadline, February 27th, 2026. Again, upcoming reporting deadline, February 27th, 2026. This report should cover the full calendar year, January 1st through December 31st, 2025. So note, those are adjustments, and you'll see that information again. We know change can be challenging, but this transition is part of OJP's broader effort to streamline and modernize our reporting infrastructure, ultimately making things simpler. We appreciate being able to walk through this with you today. NTTAC will cover all the specifics about what's changed, what's new, and where to find support. I'll remain online throughout the presentation and will be available during the Q&A to help address any questions. And with that, I'll turn things over to Rachel and Melissa from NTTAC to begin.
Great, thank you, David. I'm going to share my screen to show you our slides. Okay, great. You should all see my slides now. So hi, everyone. Like David said, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to talk to you about the changes to the reporting process and transition to JustGrants. My name is Rachel Castellano. I'm the Evaluation Manager on NTTAC's Research and Evaluation team. And I'm joined by Melissa Rory, who you'll hear from in a little bit, who's our Senior Methodologist. So today we'll be sharing more about the reporting process and also updates to updated and new TTA activity, deliverable types, and performance metrics. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to read through the PDF of the performance metric questions that were shared in an email last week. We're also going to attach them in the chat here. And there will be time for questions at the end, but also feel free to send them in as we're presenting. So this is our agenda for today. We'll go over a reporting overview, deadlines, changes, some updated definitions, and like I said, talking about updates to TTA activities and deliverables. And then we'll talk about where you can find support for your reporting process. So as David mentioned, but we just want to highlight again because we know it is different. The reporting deadline, the next one is February 27th, 2026. So you have a little over a month. And for this reporting period, we're asking you to report on all of the work completed between January 1st and December 31st, 2025. After this reporting period, we'll go back to the period length that you're used to. So the next one will be The deadline will be July 30th, 2026, and that will cover activities and deliverables completed between January 1st and June 30th of this year. Okay, so some changes. Like David said, we want to acknowledge that change can be intimidating, but I'm also here to reassure you that a lot is staying the same. We just want to highlight the changes. As you've heard, reporting will only take place in JustGrants, so no need to go to two places now. We're no longer reporting in the TTARP. Another notable change that we wanted to highlight is that when you see the performance metric questions in JustGrants, they're going to ask you about all of the work for one TTA or deliverable type. Instead of having a question specifically for each completed training, for example, you're going to see the questions ask you about the trainings conducted for the whole reporting period. So again, that's for all of 2025 for this upcoming reporting deadline. So it'll something like how many trainings did you complete during the reporting period? How many individuals attended trainings during that reporting period? You will still report on performance metrics as you did in the TTARP. And we'll go over some of the ways that those have been revised. I do want to note that when you go into JustGrants, you're going to see questions for all of the TTA activity and deliverable types. So you will scroll through to answer the questions that pertain to the work that you completed. So I wanted to highlight that we changed the definitions of TTA activity and deliverables. Now, this does not change the way that you need to think about them. We just did this in an effort to make that clearer. But again, the way that you're delineating between TTA activity and deliverable is not changing. Just wanted to show you that we're clarifying with these updates. So for example, we added a section to the TTA activity definition that just clarifies that TTA activities can be informational, they can be limited, they can be intensive. Deliverable, same thing. It's the same concept. We just updated the definition and we added this phrase at the end that we hope will be helpful when you're conceptualizing, is this a TTA activity or is this a deliverable? Generally, a deliverable can be printed or paused. So on this screen, you're going to see the TTA activity types on the left are what you're used to reporting on. The TTA activities on the right of this table are the updated ones. Where we've changed things are where you see them bolded. Now, in a lot of situations, we just consolidated types that we felt could go together. So for example, you'll see there used to be separate training types for webinar and live video. We consolidated that into one. So now it's live video, live webinar. Again, all of this is in that PDF that has all of the questions and all of the definitions. One that I do want to draw your attention to is there used to be one TTA activity type called peer-to-peer support. We broke that up into two. So now we have single session peer-to-peer support and ongoing peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. The difference between these two is that a single session is intermittent learning or support. This includes one-time site-based visits versus ongoing knowledge exchange is more ongoing long-term support. This includes learning communities, communities of practice, and peer-to-peer mentoring initiatives. I also want to bring your attention to these two new TTA activity types on the right side of the screen. These are new that we're introducing. So we have coaching and mentoring and administrating microgrants, and I'll run through these definitions in a second. So I wanted to show you what I mean by consolidating some of the TTA activity types. Again, our effort was really to consolidate it and make it easier for you to categorize and know where to identify the work that you're completing. So like I said before, we consolidated training, live video, and webinar into one. Again, these definitions are on that PDF. We also consolidated program implementation, management, and support, and program practice implementation into one. So these are the new TTA types that I wanted to draw your attention to. So we have one now called coaching and mentoring, which is ongoing assistance through regular meetings and consistent contact with a subject matter expert, consultant, or field leader to provide coaching and mentoring. We also have administrating microgrants, which is management, oversight, and administration of microgrants to subgrantees. This includes ensuring compliance with funding guidelines and providing ongoing support. If you provide additional TTA that supports the microgrant funded activities like provision of resources, we would ask that you put that under that appropriate TTA type. So you might have administrating microgrants and provision of resources or something else that go together but are distinct TTA types based on the definitions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Melissa, to take us through thinking through the performance metric questions.
All right, thanks so much, Rachel. So obviously we just reviewed some changes to the definitions for TTA activities. And I think the next thing to know is how you're going to be asked to report on these activities. Before going into specifics, I think it's really important to note that we collect this information to demonstrate the impact that you have on the field. And to better demonstrate how much you are doing for the field, some of the performance metrics questions have been revised since the last reporting period. So for TTA activities, the performance metrics are going to take the form of what we are calling either count questions or evaluation questions. So on the left, you have a description of the count questions, and these really should look familiar to you. These questions ask about the number of people who participated in engagements, as well as asking about the total number of each type of activity that occurred in the reporting period. Some questions may also ask about the total volume of something associated with an activity. And I'll show you some examples in just a second. The information needed to answer these count questions really should be collected by you as part of TTA administration. So for example, you probably already count the number of people who register for events and how many people actually attend. On the right-hand side are evaluation questions, and these should also be familiar to some of you. But again, some of these questions have changed since the last reporting period. So these questions get at participants' experiences with the engagements. For example, their satisfaction or whether they learned something useful. To collect this information, we recommend developing a survey, questionnaire, or poll that can be given to TTA participants at the end of an engagement to collect this information. So on this screen are two examples of what we are calling quote unquote count questions. The first one on the left is a question you would see if you have engaged in any policy review or development activities this reporting period. And it's a pretty straightforward question. It's just asking you, how many questions received, how many organizations received that type of support. The other question on the right is more of what I was talking about regarding like the volume amount type of question. And this one is specific to micro grant management. It's asking for the total dollar amount associated with those activities. And here are some additional examples of count questions. These are getting more at the types of resources or the types of people involved in these activities. So on the left is a question you would see if you provide resources as a TTA activity. It's simply asking you to report the number of different types of resources you developed during the reporting period. And then on the right is a question that's associated with trainings. It's asking for the number of folks in various fields who attended all trainings over the reporting period. So compared to the last reporting period, when you may have been asked to report on the number of federal versus non-federal employees, note that the categories of professional fields has changed and were expanded. So again, please take a look at the PDF that was attached to the email you received and has been attached to the chat. So finally, for TTA activities, here are some examples of evaluation questions. On the left are two questions that we ask across multiple types of TTA engagements. You'll see these types of questions for things like host conferences, trainings, peer-to-peer support, and then peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. So the first question is just simply asking the number of individuals who indicated an increased knowledge level as a result of participating in the engagement. And then the one on the bottom left is asking for the number of individuals who indicated that they plan to change their own behavior as a result of the engagement. On the right, we have a few activity types that may have some additional evaluation questions because they are of particular interest. So for example, if you provided trainings during the reporting period, you'll see a question like the one on the right asking how many people indicated that the TTA providers were effective in delivering those trainings. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about deliverables. Similarly to TTA activities types, we have updated the categories associated with deliverables. And as an example, and as you can see on the slide, we have one quote unquote print resources category that combines 7 of the previous categories into one. We also updated recorded deliverables to reflect changing technology. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that there are 2 new categories for deliverables. We now ask specifically about deliverables associated with presentations, as well as quote unquote other deliverables. And I want to reiterate what Rachel said about the definition of deliverables. A presentation deliverable is not the presentation itself, it's something related to the presentation that can be paused or printed. So if you participate in a conference session, that is not in and of itself a deliverable. But if you participate in a conference session and develop presentation slides to share with others, those slides could be considered a deliverable. So this slide shows just 2 of the updated definitions for deliverables, and I'm not going to read these aloud. Really, again, we just want to demonstrate how we consolidated multiple categories into one or updated the definitions to reflect changes in technology. Again, this is not an inclusive list of updated deliverable definitions, so please review the PDF to see all of the relevant changes. And then, like I said earlier, there are 2 new categories of deliverables to know about. First, presentations are defined as the development or enhancement of slides and deliverables for delivering presentations. And then other deliverables are simply materials that can't be included in a different deliverable category. Again, any materials reported under these categories really should be something that could be printed or paused. So now that you know about the changes to the definitions for deliverables, let's talk again about how you're going to be asked to report on them. So for deliverables, the performance metrics are all going to take the form of count questions. There are no evaluation questions being asked about deliverables. However, we do think it's important to distinguish between 3 kind of different types of count questions here. So first, we have the count of distribution or use. And this is these questions are asking information about how many people gain access to your deliverables. Then we have the count of newly created or revision of existing deliverables. And these questions are asking about how many deliverables you created or revised. And then finally, we have website-specific count questions. And these questions are really specifically for those of you who develop or manage BJA-funded websites. And just like with TTA activities, here are some examples of what the distribution, use, and creation revision questions would look like. We use training materials questions here as examples because we know that trainings are a common activity across awards. But again, please review the PDF to see relevant questions for all deliverables categories. But for now, you can see the differences between the 2 types of questions here. The one on the left is asking how many people received training materials across all distribution methods. And then the question on the right is really asking what you did, like how you developed, how many training materials you developed or revised. And then finally, for our discussion of deliverables related performance metrics, here are 2 of the website specific questions. So here you can see that we ask for things like the number of visits to web pages, as well as the average visit length. Other questions inquire about website development, revision, or maintenance activities. And then finally, you are expected to answer the same narrative semi-annual grant report questions as you have in previous reporting periods. I'm not going to go into great detail about these. I don't believe that there have been any changes to these questions. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to David to talk about JustGrants support. But before I do, I just want to thank all of you for being here. We are really excited to be moving into a more streamlined data collection effort. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to David to conclude before we open the presentation up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Melissa. So, and I've been tracking some of the questions, so I know we'll get to those, but we do want to highlight, we recognize that you're not going to get all of the information necessarily here in this webinar. There are going to be some specific questions that may require follow-up, and we want to make sure that you've got access to the resources so that we can support the work that you're doing. So as you see on the screen, and we'll provide these links to you, there are some online resources, support for JustGrants, the platform. The training is available there as well, along with some links to the frequently asked questions. And as you see, as we've moved from the TTARP system and NTTAC into JustGrants, the customer service and contact information is listed there for JustGrants. And then the last thing I will note is, as is always the case, please reach out to your individual program award cooperative agreement policy advisors and send questions that you have to them, and they can assist us in gathering and collecting and making sure that you're getting appropriate responses. And so with that, I think we'll take a look at the questions that came in. So let me pull these up here. So I appreciate the first question on whether these reporting questions are going to be what we're going to be using now and moving forward, or should you guys expect more changes? So I didn't mention, I am a recovering criminal defense attorney, so I'm going to lean into my lawyerly response here. It's a great question. These are the performance measure questions that we'll be using moving forward in JustGrants. And as with any reporting system, we're going to continue to review and refine the process based on the feedback from you, from our policy advisors, from programs, and the evolving needs, right? We're going to do just like we ask you to do. And so based on that, there may be adjustments over time. However, there are no specific changes planned at this time. Our goal is to maintain consistency and stability in the reporting process, but most importantly, ensuring we're capturing the most meaningful data about the TTA work that you all are doing. So there's my shucking and jiving for that question. There was another question regarding whether this would apply for final reports. I am going to confirm on that. My understanding is that these questions should mirror just as they would for your semi-annuals. So these questions in JustGrants are now the question sets that are tied to your cooperative agreements. And so for each of those reporting periods, these will be the question sets that occur. And Kiana, if you want to make sure I don't miss any questions, highlight any for me, that would be great.
Yes, several. There's a new one. In the reporting sections of the report, what is defined as a legislative body, or who would be included in that?
Are we looking at are we referencing the PDF that has all of the questions where it says who the audiences are? And so that's going to be kind of local to you, right? Depending on, so I used to live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Heaven forbid it's a state, right? So they've got different structures. That could be your state legislative body. That may be your county individual. It is thinking about it as this is the entity in the relevant space that I am working that has our legislative or those administrative controls there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Not sure if you already addressed this one, so sorry if you did. For grants that have
Yep.
been within this reporting period, meaning September 30, 2025, will this apply for final reports that are due January?
Yeah. So it should. It should, absolutely. I am going to tackle one. So there was a question about for those that were able to enter your TTA activities into the TTARP portal, which you no longer have access to. And so kind of two parts of the question. There were two questions. One, should we report those activities again along with the form? Yes. We are going to ask, these are aggregate questions now. So instead of having to report for each individual 50 webinars you did, it is going to be aggregate. Again, I recognize having to do that work, but we do appreciate that and ensures that it's in the system and able for us to navigate. There was a second question about whether or not the data that was already put in could be extracted. My answer to that, I'm going to lean into my Marine Corps training where I learned there are three answers. Yes, sir, no, sir, I don't know, sir, but I will find out. And I'm going to lean heavy into that last one. I don't have an answer for you. I don't want to misspeak right now. We've made note of that. I've made note of it in a couple of places on my end. We need to make sure that that's technologically possible and kind of what the process will be. But recognize that that would be a great benefit to you all who are able to get the data in before the TTARP system went offline. And so certainly we'll make sure we get an answer to that and follow up with you all regarding that.
All right, another one for you is specifically talking about the semi-annual report, the one that's due soon. Is the time frame for that still July 1 through December 31, 2025?
No, so that is the correction, right? So for your last semi-annual report, the TTARP was offline, right? And so we had sent out an email and we asked that you only respond with the narrative questions. And so we don't have within the system, other than those of you who were able to input stuff in TTARP as you were going along, we have not captured the data for the first part of the year. So for this semi-annual report that you are going to be completing, not at the end of this month, right? But February 27th, 2026, that's our new magic date. So that semi-annual report, which normally would be from July until December, is now you are going to be reporting all of 2025 from January through December 2025.
Lots of questions for you. Another one is for the updated performance metric question about field. We did not ask that information of participants over the last year. So how would you like them to respond to that field?
Absolutely. So if there are instances where you don't have that data, currently none of these fields are mandatory in that you will be able to progress without putting information there. And so in that instance, you can go ahead and leave that blank. Most of these questions, double check because we pulled from and looked towards what we were capturing in TTARP. So if it isn't a direct one-to-one, just confirm that you weren't capturing that in your previous measures. It may have, and we'll double check that, Rachel, and make sure. And so I see the question, the report should be available to you in JustGrants now. If you log into JustGrants now, you should see the revised date of February 27th. So 2/27/2026, and the question sets should be in there.
Okay, the 7 narrative questions that were historically in the TTARP are not showing for someone in JustGrants. So where should those be submitted if they don't see them?
Okay, that I will make note of that. There was a push to update those questions into the performance report, and so that may just not have cleared on the back end, on the tech end. We can make sure that you have a copy of those questions, but they will be added. They will be added to the question set. They're in the system. It may just not have migrated through all of the 132 of you all cooperative agreements.
Next, do you know if there are any character or word count limitations for the narrative questions, and are they able to include attachments in JustGrants?
So you can include attachments as you always could in JustGrants. As far as character limitations, I am not entirely sure. That would be a phenomenal question for the JustGrants tech people. But we've captured that. And if I can get a solid answer when we do a follow-up email with some of this information, we'll make sure we're able to provide that for you.
Okay, this next question has a theoretical example. So if a TTA provider hosts one large-scale training, which is the deliverable, that is comprised of 50 assets like PowerPoints, presentations, etc., should this be reported as 1 or 50? And actually, maybe Rachel and Melissa might want to answer that one.
I believe the answer is 50. Each individual deliverable should be counted separately.
Well, so I'll pause for a second, right? Because you've got the activity, which is the training, and then you have the deliverables, the print pause, right? Which would be the PowerPoint and those. So in fact, your training would be reported as the single training. And then if you had a deliverable of a PowerPoint or the series of PowerPoints, the curriculum that goes with that training, it would be reported as the deliverable or relevant deliverables.
Similar question for websites. If a TTA provider maintains one website, which is the deliverable, that is comprised of 200 assets, like web pages within the overall website, how should that be reported? One website, 200 assets, some other number?
So, at this stage, we're gathering aggregate data. And so you're going to want to report as best you can across your web page. Now, I will note that in some instances, for some of the cooperative agreements, it is supporting the entire web page, right? It's supporting the entire, like every subpage and everything that goes with it. In other instances, you may be only supporting a single page, like a single actual web page in a broader web, your own web page, for example, and that data we don't care about and is irrelevant to us. It's only that individual page that we may be funding.
Okay,
Okay, and
several questions related to the deadline. So I'm going to skip all those because I think David's answered them. But if you still have questions about the deadline, please do keep adding your comments into the chat and we'll address them. Just to confirm, TTA providers are not expected to submit a separate semi-annual report for July 1 to December 31, 2025. Is that correct?
This is your semi-annual report for July 1 to December 2025. We are asking you to aggregate all of your data in that report for January 1 through the end of December.
What role in JustGrants will staff need in order to be able to enter the information?
Phenomenal question, and I will get back to you on that one because I don't have a solid answer for you. I am going to phone a friend while we're still on and see if I can get an answer for you.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready for the next question, David.
Go ahead. Sorry, I muted myself there.
So the identifiers for various agency types have been changed, and so they don't match current database tracking types and don't include agency types that had been in the system, such as federal agencies. So how should TTA providers manage or input that data in the future? Should they use other, as in quotes, for those? And if so, that'll drastically limit the analysis of those types of agencies that would be lumped together in the other category.
Absolutely. We recognize that. Making adjustments like this, streamlining processes, changing fields, there's always going to be some give and take, right? So we do recognize that moving from kind of the depth of questions that we were asking before to here, that we are going to lose some of that analysis. So, I appreciate that acknowledgement and that recognition. In this instance, if you do not find an appropriate applicable category organization title that matches what you have captured and what we were capturing previously, then yes, other would be appropriate. And it's on us on our end if we need to do follow-up and move on from there. But I appreciate the attention to detail because you're absolutely right. The more data and information that we have, the better ability for you all and for us to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our communities.
Next question is for questions similar to how many times were BJA funded multimedia deliverables accessed, as in downloaded or viewed during the reporting period. Can clarification be given on if this is asking, one, for all multimedia deliverables created under the award, how often were they accessed? Or two, for multimedia deliverables created during the reporting period, how often they were accessed during the reporting period?
I am tracking the question and I am going to get back to you because I need to review which of those, because I know in some sections we have made a distinction between, unless Rachel or Melissa, you know, right off the top.
Yes. Sorry, Rachel. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it's about the time frame that's being considered. Am I interpreting that right, Kiana?
I think so.
It's whether we're asking about how many times a deliverable that was created at any time under the award, how many times that deliverable was accessed during the reporting period, or just deliverables created during the reporting period. How many times were they accessed?
I'm tracking now. So if I'm looking at, for those of you who have the PDF open, so looking at the multimedia questions, so like I think question 59 is the question we're talking about, followed by 60 and 61. So 59, the intent is to capture anything that was funded under the award, regardless of reporting period, right? You may have created it the previous reporting period and maybe like the last day of the reporting period and had one download. We want to capture that you then had another 600 downloads in the next reporting period, right? So that first question is, regardless of which of the reporting periods under the award, and then the following two questions provide during the reporting period, that clarification.
Okay, in the TTA activities section, there is a count question for how many individuals attended the trainings, but the definitions for trainings include in-person, live video, webinar, self-paced modules, and phone. To answer that, are we combining the total number of attendees to our live events with those who have access and completed modules in an LMS?
Yes, the training questions are aggregated across different types of trainings.
Okay, regarding awards that have ended during the reporting period, September 30, 2025, the final report due January 28th is still showing JustGrants as only a PDF upload and still due January 28th. Will this be updated to show the new reporting component, and will the due date be extended?
I am not going to give you a solid yes, but that should occur. And we'll make sure that if it doesn't, that we've got communication as to what the next steps are. But I'm going to lean towards, yes, it should be updated and you should see the new questions. But also give myself the wiggle room of if that changes, we'll make sure you have information to that effect.
Okay, regarding training events that were scheduled during the reporting period, do you want TTA providers to show that they had events scheduled but then had to be rescheduled due to CCF, CCR timeline changes, or do you not want those to be recorded?
No, absolutely. So those won't be recorded in your capture where they ask the questions, how many occurred, right? But if you think through your narrative questions, like there is a narrative question about barriers, there's a narrative question about like, how could BJA be helpful? Please, by all means, that's your opportunity to identify like, hey, we were going to do 600 webinars and then, you know, this happened, or whatever the case may be. That provides us the opportunity to be responsive to those things, and currently is the appropriate place to put those.
Okay, this question is similar to what we've talked about, slightly different though. Concerning the written semi-annual report, so the narrative questions, the 7 narrative questions at the end, not the performance measure questions, are those still, should those only be reflective of July through December? Because previously TTA providers did submit the 7 narrative questions for January to June. So do you want this round of 7 narrative questions to be only July through December, or again, January through December?
We're going to do January through December for the entirety of the report. If we need to deaggregate that on our end, we can do that because we have your other semi-annual report. But in order to kind of keep all of the data and keep everything consistent, please answer those questions for the entire time period.
Okay, another TTA provider has a very limited number of staff that access JustGrants in their office, and none of those staff are the programmatic staff that write the reports. Is there a way to answer the questions outside of JustGrants, and then the JustGrants administrator uploads the answers into JustGrants?
I'll have to communicate with the JustGrants staff. I don't believe so. You can download, like we've got, obviously you have the question sets, and they can be done by your programmatic staff and then provided that way. And yes, it would require manual. That is a limitation different from the TTARP system, where you were able to input either via Excel and upload, or through different accounts. It is going to be limited to the appropriate JustGrants staff.
And a really helpful answer someone else provided to that question is that in their office, they have one grant administrator who creates a spreadsheet with all the questions that JustGrants has, and then they pass that spreadsheet around in-house and have the programmatic staff fill that out. So that might be a helpful solution for some. Which I think answered that last question there. Okay, so I think we were caught up on all the questions. So if anyone still has a question that has not been answered, please do add that to either the chat or the Q&A. And we will, to the latest comment that was in there, you can use the PDF that BJA sent out and we provided in the chat. You could use that as your guide to get the questions. The questions are the same in that PDF and in JustGrants. Okay, latest.
Yeah, I see Brian's question. So here is going to be my response to that. And I appreciate the question. If you are able to, and you have your own systems to capture this data, and it's important and helpful for you, and you believe it is important and helpful for us, you are able to do that. So this adjustment is to what is required to be reported in our systems. So when, to your question, Brian, capturing the number of class records created, if you still have the capacity to do that, you can do that. You can certainly put that in the narrative. You can share that with your policy advisor, even if we aren't capturing it, right? So these performance measures, these JustGrants questions is the floor. This is what we're going to compete, and we're going to be collecting. I anticipate for many, if not all of you, there is some additional questions, and there'll be some additional metrics that you're capturing for your own process, right? For your own evaluation and adjustments to your own work. And so you certainly, this is not, you're not limited to doing that, right? And so we definitely appreciate that. And I'm looking at the last question, and then there we go.
Regarding
so for
customer service, there's an email address on that same webpage, and that's the best way to reach out and get customer service support. There's a phone number as well. Sorry, David, go ahead. You see that?
No, it's okay.
Question?
I did, but you handled it perfectly. And I was looking to see if you were uploading on behalf of the project team. Do you say no to the question? Are you the training and technical assistance provider? I'm not sure which specific question that is. If you were reporting for the technical assistance provider, I believe the answer to that is yes. And here's what I'm going to tell you, because we're kind of at the tail end of our time. I highly encourage you to reach out to your individual policy advisors to indicate to them kind of what additional questions you have. We'll be capturing those. We'll capture the questions that we've already received to include some of the answers and the responses. There will be this is recorded, so this will be available, and we will do our best to make sure we send up follow-up correspondence that captures some of what we've already talked about. So I know we didn't address everything, but I am gonna ask that you follow up with your individual policy advisors, and then we'll make sure on our end that we're getting you the information that is needed for you all to complete this.
All right, and that is the end of the questions. So go ahead and wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate everybody's time and attendance. I appreciate everyone's largely smiling faces. I've been on your side of the screen. I've been on this side of the screen. You all do amazing work, and we appreciate the opportunity to support you doing that work and how you are supporting the communities across this country. And so we look forward to continuing that opportunity. I anticipate hearing from you through your policy advisors. And with that, have a wonderful afternoon.